Well, hello, everybody. I am Kari the Mortician, and I'm here with our next edition of Victims of Crime, Morticians Talk, or Embalmers Talk. I can't even remember what this is called, but I'm here with Ryan and Brian from, I think Brian's down here, Brian's over here, from Undertaking the Podcast. They are funeral directors and embalmers down in Indiana. So welcome, guys.
Hey, Kari.
Hey.
What's up?
And it's been a hot minute. We were just, it's been a little while since we recorded together. So we got to get back our mojo and get in our groove, I guess.
Let's see if we still got it.
I know. Well, our episode we're filming today and talking about is a pretty well-known case. So we don't just discuss cases to discuss cases. The main point is how funeral directors handle that type of a deceased, or rather the cause of death or the condition of the body. So that's kind of where we dive into, but we also discuss the case a little bit, and then you can go look into it further if you'd like. So here we go, guys. And the guys don't know what case we're discussing. So we are going to talk today about Jessica Chambers. Now, does the name pop to you guys at all?
Yeah, but I'm drawing a blank. I do this every time.
I know. It's like, oh, I know it. As soon as I start talking, I think you'll know. So the Clarion Ledger reported on December 6, 2014, a 19-year-old teenager was found walking down the side of a Mississippi road engulfed in flames with burns on 98% of her body. Some reports said different numbers, but it was over 90% of her body was burning. She was airlifted to a Memphis hospital where she died on December 7th. And the cause of death was listed as thermal injury, which I don't know if I've ever seen thermal injury as a cause of death, but this was a super itty bitty town called Cortland down in Mississippi. Do you guys remember this case at all now that I'm talking?
Yeah, it's ringing a bell, but
Okay.
outside of that, I don't have a lot of details.
Well, I'm going to give a little more information to this, and then we're going to chat. So, as Unsolved Mystery reported, a flammable liquid had been poured down on her body and down her throat and up her nose. The internal damage from burning would have been horrific. Looking into the case, so around 5:30, she had been at a gas station. She had been a high school cheerleader. She was just this little blonde little thing, just itty bitty, so cute. So Google her name, and as soon as you see her face, you're going to know who she is, guys, because she was all over the news. She had been over visiting somewhere, so they kind of tracked her along the evening. And then finally found her car that was engulfed in flames. So you may remember the case because the first responders all reported that she had said or muttered the name Eric or Derek. And this became a huge part of the case along the way. So the first responders had reported she had her arms out when they got there. So she was still alive, with over 90% of her body and internally over 90% of her body burnt. And she had her arms out saying, "Help me, help me, help me," as Cole, one of the first responders, reported at the trial. Her hair was fried, her face was black, and her body was burnt. And she had no clothing on except for some underpants. He had saw her in the middle of the road, and they went up, wrapped a blanket around her to conceal her, but then they tried to even walk her back to the first responder. Can you even imagine? Like, I can't even imagine. I burned my finger and I'm like, beside myself. So I can't imagine that kind of a burn.
They tried to walk her?
They did. They wrapped her and they tried to walk her, and then she kind of gave up and she reached out for the first responder, and that's kind of it. So that was like his testifying. So you're a first responder. Ryan, talk about, coming upon that scene and what you would think.
Honestly, walking, that was on their end. That's ridiculous. I don't know why. She should have probably been in full C-spine and all that on a cot. I guess I'd have to be in the situation, but I wouldn't be walking somebody. The biggest thing that I worry about in that situation as a paramedic is her airway. We obviously know she's alive, so her heart is beating. but the airway is the biggest issue, especially from what you've stated with flammable liquid being poured down her throat. That will create some challenges, not only obviously for her, but also if I'm going to intubate, which intubation is me putting a breathing tube down into her trachea from her mouth. If I'm going to be able to do that or try to do that the best I can, you're always searching for landmarks. Well, those landmarks within anatomical landmarks within her throat, the epiglottis, the trachea, that'll all be very distorted, I would assume, with the burns. As a paramedic, I'm going to be worried about her throat swelling as well in constricting that airway. The next thing, you're going to have to find IV access somewhere. And being that we don't have, pictures or anything, it would be tough. I mean, 90% of her body, 3rd-degree burns. Is that what you said?
They just said burned over 90% of her body. So okay. They never really give a breakdown of things. They did, to give a little more information from things I had found. The forensic pathologist told jurors in the court, a lot of this was a courtroom, she had died from smoke and soot inhalation and thermal heat exposure. They saw autopsy photos, which showed soot on the vocal cords. I mean, she had burned inside so badly. Her tongue was swollen. There was no muscular damage to the tongue because a lot of it was her, they kept saying her talking. Was she really saying Eric or Derek? Like that was such a big part of this whole case, that aside. And then they also said there was no blunt force damage. But the burn victim nurse, her name was Mary Beth, said she was burned so badly her chest could not expand, which is a big thing with burns, is all your tissue constricts down that you can't get that breath in to breathe. They were so deep she couldn't move, she couldn't stretch, she couldn't breathe. You'd give her air, but it just wouldn't go anywhere, and she ended up dying very shortly after. But let's talk 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Brian, can you give a breakdown on that?
Oh boy. I mean,
anatomy and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, so, from an embalmer standpoint, we're going to spend a lot of time with our, pre-embalming analysis and seeing what we have. So we know that, there's going to be a post-mortem, an autopsy done in this case. So we're going to be receiving a person that died under these circumstances from a medical examiner or coroner's office. And then, we, as funeral directors, a lot of times we're told, 1st-degree burns, 2nd-degree burns, 3rd-degree burns. And, until we get someone into our care so we can actually see, we can't do a lot with that information. So, 1st-degree burn, if I remember everything right, we're going to be looking at something like a sunburn, some redness, possible. I believe when we get into 2nd, we see blistering and we start seeing that, the really deterioration by heat of the tissue. 3rd-degree burns even more so. So our epidermis is going to be probably gone. Not much of a blistering. We're down to the dermis. And, when we get into that 4th, I mean, we're talking about charred, blackened tissue. I can say, thankfully for me as an embalmer, this is not a situation that I've encountered. And it's a situation that's going to be rare across embalmers all across this country, even at the largest of firms. I mean, there may be funeral directors that go their careers and not see burns. And there may be some, even in small towns like me, that they see multiple ones. So it's something as an embalmer we never can tell. But until we have someone into our care, we can't just go off of the information that we're told. We got to start analyzing when we see someone in our care.
Which is good just across the board. Like we've talked in past episodes, any accident or anything, you've got to sometimes just bathe the person and get down to see really what's going on there and where the trauma is, because there's such an extreme spectrum from barely any scratches on somebody to completely, like with a burn, you could die just of smoke inhalation and a fire, all the way to completely charred, black, no viable tissue even left on the person.
And Brian, real quick to touch on that. I mean, I've had something of that nature, a person that was actually in a vehicle that was fully involved fire. And it was a car accident, and, a horrible situation. absolutely horrible. But there does come a point in these situations where, with as much restorative work as you try to put in, it just may not work. You know what I mean? Because, Brian, we've talked about, you talked about the charring and the breakdown of the tissue. Sometimes it's hard to get that tissue to even look natural from that point, and then also the tissue that either is decayed or already decaying. Some of that has to be removed, to find a spot that maybe is natural good tissue to build up from. The situation I was in, there was no way of actually putting this person in a casket and showing them to the public. It was not going to happen. And here's the thing, Brian, both of us, and Kari, I think you can attest to this too. I mean, I'm willing to try anything.
Yeah.
When it comes to embalming, restorative art, all that, I've had some really good people in my life that have been able to teach me to do a lot of things. In this situation, it wasn't going to happen. There's just no way. And it would be hard for me to explain to people without going into too graphic detail as to what some of the ailments we were dealing with there. But I will say this: when someone burns, as you stated, Kari, the skin tightens up. People will contract very much so within the joint area. Everything tightens up. So to get that natural form back, to have people laying in that position, in that sleeping position or laying in repose, it's going to be hard to get to that point without taking some pretty extensive measures when it comes to that. So there are times where there's nothing that can be done. There are times where, stuff can be fixed fairly easily. It just takes some time. So if you have to spend 30 some hours, putting someone back into their natural form, it can be done. But there, I think we do have to come to the realization that there are those moments where it's just not going to happen. And it's nothing that the embalmer did or skill set of the embalmer. It's just the trauma is just so bad that it can't be fixed.
Well, it's one of those things where sure, you could clean everything off the bone and then, like forensic anthropologists do, build the bone back up with wax, but then it's the only thing there that's the person is the bone structure underneath, and you've created all the tissue again. And with some fire damage, that's almost what you have to do, because you can't get to anything that's even viable. If you have first, second degree, some second, you might be able to peel off the blisters, peel off the outer, dry out what is there, and cosmetize over, and have some visual for the family at least to see, just at least get to something for the family.
The other thing, can I comment on this real quick, Kari? The other thing you're going to see is some major dehydration, obviously, because it's heat. But you're going to see a difference in eyelids. You're going to see the mouth. I've seen this where, lips, retract, dehydrate to a point where, you're seeing just teeth, and the jawline is different and distorted. So the challenges there are across the board when it comes to getting somebody back. And then also, as you said too, the tissue tightens up. So it's harder for us to do things that, maybe if we need to stretch the tissue a little bit, you've got to be careful, because you can't do that necessarily with these types of cases,
Soft tissue burns off first. I mean, the tip of the nose, the lips, the eye, they're so thin and there's not much there that those kind of are gone first, because there's not many layers to your eyes and things. So they're going to you're going to have to restore those much quicker than other areas of the body as well. Well, go ahead.
Well, I don't know. I mean, finding tissue, I think, is sometimes the toughest part. Good tissue to build off of, to dry out and build off of. There's times where, like you said, I mean, I'll debrief these people in certain aspects, you know, depending on what I'm trying to do. Especially, you know, everybody talks about, you know, and this is going to sound weird, but the money shots, you know what I mean? And the money shots are the hands and the face.
Right.
Those are the things that people see. Other things can be covered with clothing or whatever else. I think you've got to also worry about smell. With this, you know, that's something you're going to have to battle immensely, because that smell, the thing about that smell is it doesn't go away and it stays with you. It's almost like it sits in your nose with you for 2 or 3 weeks. Once you smell that, you never forget what that is. You never forget. I mean, it's embedded in your head. So yeah, lots of problems, I think, lots of problems.
I think that smell is such a main component, because you really, it's sometimes almost worse than decomp in a certain way, because it's so distinct. You know, people ask, I don't know if you guys get this question, like, oh, when somebody's being cremated, is there a smell? Like I hate saying, like a meat burning, kind of like that human, and there isn't, because the heat is so hot. But when you have a fire, in a car, things like that, it's different. It's a
completely different smell. Completely different smell.
And I think that's what people anticipate a crematory smells like, and it's not even at all. Nope. There's none of that. At least
honestly, with a crematory, I don't know that you have too much of a smell. It's just heat. You just feel heat. Like,
yeah, I don't smell anything when I'm there, but
when we walk into our crematory, I mean, we don't. I don't really have a smell of anything. It's just hot, completely hot.
Yeah. Brian, what else do you have? You're quiet over there today.
He is quiet, isn't he? Dangerous. That makes me nervous when he's quiet.
I know. He's just sitting with his little Undertaking sign behind him. Just
mine's on a hell of a roll, so I don't want to slow him down. But you know, I guess where my mind has been going is, you know, what are my steps as an embalmer? And I think an embalming in this case is, you know, to have that chance is really probably going to be necessary. And we as embalmers can advise you as a family if, you know, can we do it without embalming? And, you know, so there's going to be some restorative aspect to this, because in this type of case, there's that post-mortem, that autopsy. So there's going to have to be some work to make them whole again. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, in my brain as an embalmer goes, okay, the first thing I need to do is, you know, after my pre-embalming analysis, is have a proper embalming. And, you know, I'm going to weigh the situation in front of me with the techniques and the chemicals that I use. So, you know, as we progress into 3rd and 4th degree burns, 4th degree, you're probably not going to be embalming at all. I mean, you might be able to try, but your vascular system isn't going to be complete. Same way with 3rd, it's very possible that there's going to be, you know, distal ends of the body, the hands, the feet, and, you know, those certain surfaces that are thin that are just not complete. So with your embalming, you could possibly distort tissue even more. So we've got to be very conscious about our fluid selection and how we go about it. Because in my head here, the thing that keeps in my head, there's 2 things, is firm and dry. We're taught as embalmers that we need firm and dry tissue for restorative work. And then the other thing I keep thinking of is we need to go from the knowns. We need to find, as embalmer, what do we know, and then start working towards what we don't know. So, you know, for me, you know, a proper embalming, then we need to make sure areas are dry. Areas of the body that have been burned, I mean, we can make bandages for that aren't going to be seen. So, you know, we just try. And then as things progress through the embalming, through bathing, through, you know, as we start to make someone whole again, that picture becomes a little more clear. And frankly, even clothes helps, and our bandages help, and things become a little bit more, I guess as an embalmer, you become a little bit more optimistic. You're like, okay, I think we can do this now. I mean, because again, our goal is to have someone who's recognizable, identifiable, and that 3rd one always runs away from me, Ryan. But you know, those are the, you know, some of the main ones there. Kari, real quick, guys, though, we had a guest on the podcast, Anne-Marie, who is an embalmer from Missouri, and she was called to serve for a family who lost 3 children in a house fire.
Mm.
And we're talking 3rd and 4th degree burns, and there was no possibility of arterial injection. And it sounds like from the story that she told, there wasn't a time frame to, do some topical treatments and whatnot. But after speaking with the family, what she did was she was able to bandage the children, wrap them in ACE bandages, face, hands, gloves, sunglasses, clothing. So there was not exposed skin. There was really no identifiable marks, but that family could see those 3 children, and even by size, they knew it was them. And I'd never heard a story like that in my life. And to hear, how appreciative that family was for even that. Because, when I just hear that as an embalmer, I'm kind of like, would I do that? Is that even helpful? But, well done to her for telling us that story and for doing that. I mean, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, it's just giving that form. Anything sometimes is better than nothing.
Yeah.
With a family. I mean, I showed one finger. You could tell it was his finger. I mean, people can recognize the smallest part of someone's body, especially a parent looking at a child.
Oh yeah.
You're going to know it's your kid. You're going to know. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was going to say sometimes how helpful that is, even if it's just a finger. I mean, the closure that comes from that. Brian's talked about this time and time again. It's not real unless you see it.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways, and I think in those situations, those traumatic situations, especially with kids, seeing just a little bit of that maybe helps you cope. Anne-Marie, I don't know, if the family got to hold their kids or touch them or whatnot, but I think that's important, in all aspects, because sometimes if you don't see it, is it real? And I think that our minds are so interesting because our minds play games with us all the time. And I think in this situation or in that situation, I know how I would be. I would want to see and touch my loved one just for the sake that I know it's them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the challenge with some of these cases as well. That honestly, I thought that was a great idea, Brian. I forgot about that podcast, but I thought that was a great idea what she did. And I think if the family found value in it, I don't know that I'd care what anybody else necessarily thought about it, because I'm sure somebody probably got sideways about, I can't believe that funeral home did that. Well, it's not really up to you, first and foremost. Secondly, if the family wanted that, and if that helps them, because they don't get to see their kids ever again, it's done. It's over. They've passed away. If that helps them, I don't see any harm in that whatsoever. I thought it was a very innovative idea.
Well, and it's that taking away any doubt that might be like, oh, maybe it's not. What if, those what ifs? What if they're not really dead? What if it wasn't them? What if it wasn't, kind of thing? And it helps take away that question, I think, sometimes that you can have of, well, maybe they made a mistake, or one of those things. A couple things that popped in my mind when you guys were talking, especially with this case for Jessica. They talked about her hair and kind of her hair being fringed and gone, and you can always put a wig on. There's some little things like that's going to cover all of that burn area. Those little things can cover things that we have to battle too. If the person has clothing, that's could burn and sear to the body. So we get that body and that person, they may have clothing just burned to them that we're having to kind of work through as well, along with the tissue. So some of these other things that are compounded on top of it are going to be difficult. Suturing, if they do have an autopsy, how can we even suture that tissue back together if it's brittle and crisp? And there's no way, I won't say there's no way, but that's beyond.
Yeah. I mean, we start with trying and we try everything we can think of. And then that's when, I always say funeral directors and embalmers are some of the best improvisers. If what we know isn't working, we start to create new ways to make it work, and we have to do it on the fly.
We got to MacGyver it.
You got to MacGyver it.
We really do. It's that magician side of what we do. I feel like sometimes it's like, okay, who has ever seen this before? Nobody. Okay, well, we got to figure this out and just do it. And that's why professional relationships help, because it's like, okay, what would you do? This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? What should I do? You go outside the box, you go get ace bandages and you wrap up the kid and you make it work, because there's no protocol for a lot of what we see when it comes to these type of a situations, especially if it's crime. I mean, a crime is going to have all these other compounded layers. Obviously, we're going to have news media and, a lot more stuff going on with police and things, rather than just somebody, maybe like Ryan, you were referencing, somebody getting a car accident and burning in a car. We also run into, I think, with things are just popping in my head from earlier when you guys were talking, but the splotchiness of burns that we encounter, where it's not always consistent, where you get like a burn, something here, where it's not like massive, but you have points that are massive, where that's where restoration is really going to come in on it. And then the accelerant, I'm kind of all over the place. I'm like a freaking pinball machine right now. And the accelerant was the other thing I was going to say, with Jessica's situation, not only do we have this burn, but we have that she also has this accelerant on her that is in her tissue, that's inside of her. And whatever that accelerant, if it was gasoline, that is a smell you're not getting rid of. Kerosene, gasoline, anything along those lines is so pungent on its own to try to clean up off of her. That's its own sort of battle, I think, as well.
Kari, was this young lady embalmed? Was she shown?
I can't find anything about her funeral or any of that. So this is one of those cases. It was a good reference just because it was so well known, and the fact that she was burned alive. I mean, that's just like,
that's horrible. That's horrible.
I can't even imagine the pain of that kind of a death, and somebody doing it to somebody else on purpose is just beyond in this situation. So
how old was she?
19.
Oh my God.
Just a baby. So as the story played out in the case, just to kind of talk about the case, there was talk of, maybe it was her boyfriend, but he ended up not being, and he's since been shot and killed or something too, in a different, but there is a guy that they have been looking at, but he has not been ever arrested for it. The guy that they want for the case is in prison for credit card fraud right now, but there's not enough to, get him in prison for this permanently. It came back down that people said she was running drugs for somebody. It doesn't matter. Don't burn somebody alive. Like, there is literally no reason to do that.
How someone could justify any of that by saying that, well, she was running drugs. Okay, that's fine. She made that decision, but I don't think that, justifies being burned alive. That's garbage. The fact that anybody can say that, that's ridiculous.
A vengeful, horrible, you got to be crazy, cuckoo crazy to try to do that to somebody, let alone, I just can't even imagine. I can't imagine.
It's so sad that there's this much evil in the world, and there's a special group of people out there that don't get to hide from it or watch with one eye open on the news. Your first responders, your EMTs, your firemen, your policemen, coroner's office, medical examiners, and
paramedics.
I said paramedics.
You said EMTs. You didn't say paramedics.
Oh, well, those heroes.
There you go.
But they all have a limited amount of contact time, and your embalmer and your funeral director are going to have so much more contact time. They're always forgotten. So I think, Kari, shows like this, and, we try to do our best over there at the podcast, highlight all the efforts of our fellow funeral directors and embalmers. Cause, like Todd Van Beck says, he thinks they're heroes.
Hey, what I will say Kari, is, even though those first responders are with them a short amount of time, there's effects that happen from those situations. And I want to say this also, because I think funeral directors are affected by certain things they see in the preparation room, very much so. Pediatrics is something that is tough for me, extremely tough for me. And whether it be pre-hospital or embalming, it's something that it goes home with you. And should it? I don't think it should, but how do you help that? How, those images, there's just certain things that you can't unsee. And there's certain things that people can and can't handle, and I think it affects everybody differently. Ryan, we've talked about this, I've got my own things that I've seen in time that there's certain smells, certain music, certain things that come up that take you right back to those moments, certain sounds. I think it's the same way with the funeral director as well. Being in that preparation room for an extended amount of time, your mind really, really does get moving. And sometimes in a good way, sometimes not, not in such a great way. So I think healthy options and talking about this with people too, after you've been dealing with it, for 30 some hours, putting someone into their acceptable form, that's important. And I don't think we do that as directors enough. I don't think we talk about some of the things we see, some of the things how we feel about it. How did it affect me? How did it, that's the biggest issue. I get so tired of the mentality of rub some dirt on it and move on.
Yeah.
That's so easy to say. But until you're in the situation sometimes that we're in, it's easy to say, but it's a garbage statement. Everything affects people. It affects people differently in all forms. So that's got to be taken into consideration.
Well, I think a added layer for us as funeral directors is that it's not just a person that we care for a little bit of time. We dive into who that person is with the family, and we're feeling that whole pain with the family for days as we're working with them. So whether you're a funeral director on the front side and you're not even handling the deceased, Jessica, sitting there with Jessica's family, making arrangements, knowing that somebody did that to their daughter and having to walk with them through all of that, or on the backside in the embalming, caring for her body and seeing everything that was done to her. You've got both sides. And then if it's a small town like this was, that person's doing both. It's this compounded deep dive. And if it's a small town, they probably knew her. Everybody in a small town. So there's all these layers that as funeral directors, we do have to see and deal with. And like you were saying, images, oftentimes with a burn victim, if they're burned extensive, like you said, you get the recoil, and then you get the scream face. Yeah. And I get asked about that scream face. Do they look in pain? Were they in pain? Even if they were dead before the fire, the look on that somebody's body takes on because of that retracting and everything, it's like this scream kind of, not every time, but that extensive. And people think they were in pain, but we see that look, even if it's to open the bag and zip the bag back open, because we're not going to do anything, that you still see it and you still.
And you never forget it. You never forget it.
Those extreme cases and situations, they go in the file and you may not think of them, but then you see the mom at the store, or you drive past the tree that their car hit on the side of the road that you know that that's where the accident was. Those moments come back as you drive past places. I did a Instagram story on this the other day. Like you drive around, and if you're with part-timers, they tell you stories about houses or car accidents or things as you drive around areas. And I drive past places, and just the other day I drove past a street and I'm like, oh my gosh, so-and-so died there in an accident and blah, blah, blah. And so much of it all of a sudden just washes over, and I'm taken back, and I think about the funeral and taking care of that body and that person and that family. And I could tell you what the house address of their family is still. Like, there's just certain things, and my mind works like that anyway. My brother and sister are like, how do you remember that? I just remember crazy factoids, but it's all in there. And like you said, we don't go through enough PTSD work as funeral directors. And I can't imagine all of those EMTs, the thought of that woman alive, burning, walking at you, trying to talk, that would never go.
It doesn't
away.
leave.
No,
It doesn't leave.
no. Well, thank you guys for this very candid talk about burn victims and, caring for people in these situations and some of the possibilities, but also what we have to just accept as being what it is for us. And Jessica, hopefully she gets justice one day, because that's a terrible end for her. And thank you guys for joining me again, as always.
Thanks for having us.
Right on. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Make sure you let us know what cases we could cover and kinds of deaths and things you want us to talk about. And check out Ryan and Brian over on any podcast platform at Undertaking the Podcast. And look for that episode with Anne Marie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Yep.